Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters. We have a very special guest today, Subboor Ahmed. How are you, bro?
Alhamdulillah.
So, bro, we were talking about while you were selfishly trying to record a video for your phone, for your channel. We were talking about atheism, especially over the past couple of centuries, and especially after the Enlightenment. How there were certain atheist groups and movements, especially in France, that tried to really push ahead and disrupt and get rid of any type of religious ideas about the soul, the afterlife, and so on and so forth. So
you're talking about the guys who were doing the surgery thing, right?
Yeah.
So they were
the committee of mutual autopsy.
The committee of mutual autopsy, and consenting to dissecting each other's bodies after they die, so that they could, what was it?
Disprove the soul.
Disprove the soul. Just stupidity. And then what's that book? Say it, 7 Types of Atheism.
Yeah, 7 Types of Atheism.
In which you have the other thing about church, the atheist church, and people, having to wear these buttons inside out or whatever. Well, not inside out. How is it?
Backwards. So they would wear a special uniform.
So they have to depend on somebody else
to button them up,
and stuff like that.
To create a sense of community amongst them.
Yeah, exactly. And essentially, what they're trying to do, they are in this case, it's pretty clear. They are trying to put together a little society, because without Christianity and without any religion, in essence, you don't really have societies. You just have a bunch of individuals in which you have people focusing on, say, in their own individual needs and wants, and the collective action problems that human beings face together, such as, going back to old times, hunting and gathering and dealing with wild prey. So I guess you can call those security concerns, inter-tribal issues, warfare. Warfare is a huge collective action problem. You have to have a lot of cooperation to have warfare. And then today we would say climate change. We would say national security issues. Economics. For example, if everybody right now decided to just fill up their tanks with petrol, right?
Which people are doing whenever they get a chance.
Or what they do is everyone just starts hoarding food. That's it. We all depend on civility, right? We all depend on this type of thing. Except, from an individualistic perspective, the problem is that if we go for unfettered individualism, where you just focus on your own needs, wants, and desires, then collective action problems cannot be properly sorted out, because human beings will just not cooperate to that level. Which is why, and I think this is super important, there has been no atheist civilization. Some atheists have taken power from Christian civilizations, like in the Soviet Union, or from the remnants of Taoism. You get over time or whatever religions were left in China, and you get the communists taking over. Or, for example, in certain republics, like the French Republic, it came out of this Christian nation. So, and then those Christian values, those theistic ideas from Islam, all of these things have to be there. They have to be there in order for society to function. Morals, ethics, all of these things, they can't be grounded in thin air. They have to be grounded in something. And the atheist worldview is found wanting. It cannot actually provide a coherent and a concrete grounding for how we're supposed to behave. And one more thing I just wanted to add is, this is something we often neglect as Muslims, is the social sciences, focusing on economics and politics and psychology and sociology and these things, anthropology. It's important because they have these sort of assumptions that human beings behave according to their self-interest, or human beings behave for their inclusive fitness, all these types of things. But the fact is, that doesn't capture human beings, right? And the way that Allah describes why human beings are created and what's within us, the fitrah, that has an explanatory power far greater than these very reductive materialistic ideologies, which is why they can't properly describe society.
I was reading on the train the other day. I was reading *Man's Search for Meaning*, Viktor Frankl. Now he made a very interesting point. Yeah, he said when he was in prison in one of these Nazi camps, right, concentration camps. He said that when you look at the state of these people in prison, where everything's been stripped away from them, all of the luxuries of life, the basics of life have been taken away from them, right? It's just suffering, continuous suffering. He said in that situation, what became apparent to him was that these people, that it wasn't just, the environment, the external environment, which was controlling or dictating the way these people act. If you look at it from a materialistic perspective, you think evolution. You would think, just some aspects of anthropology, all of these types of things would determine how people act in certain situations. And he said, to some extent, that was the case. People became selfish. People, were just looking out for themselves. But he said he saw countless examples of people that, although they were in the same situation where everything was taken away, they were suffering, they were still selfless. Yeah. They gave the only piece of bread that they had to eat for the day to another person. They smiled in the face of another person. They tried to make other people happy. And he said, this proved to me that there is something about the human being which is beyond the material, the physical. And this is where he then boils it down to that there is the inner self, the spiritual self, as he refers to, that can't be taken away from you, even if everything else is taken away from you. So I thought it was really interesting you mentioning that, they want to peg everything down to materialism, right? And another point you made earlier, bro.
Say one more thing on this, right?
Yes, please.
So just today I was listening to this interesting talk on the rational choice model. So the rational choice model is, it applies in economics and sociology differently, but in essence, human beings act according to, they do a cost-benefit analysis in terms of, say, what's best for them, right? So in some fields, it's very clear. They'll say inclusive fitness, like evolutionary psychology. In other fields, they'll say economic utility, right? What was best for them economically, other sort of selfish things. The thing about a lack of a theistic input in these fields is that because of that, you get these absurd predictions. Like, if this happens, then human beings are going to do this. If this happens, human beings are going to do that. Yet human beings always manage to surprise these sociologists. They always manage to act in a way which is out of line of what they actually predicted.
Yep.
And that is because they fundamentally do not have the intellectual tools to understand the human beings, because they are neglecting revelation. They are neglecting theology, and they would say, theology is like, it's just some random thing in the past. Like, why would we need it for these social sciences? Well, you should actually consider it, because clearly it's not working. All of these models, the only thing predictable about human societies and human human behavior over the last century at least is the unpredictability of it and the way that people act. Just for example, as a interesting thing, 1950s, post World War II, then into 1960s and then 70s, you had this sexual revolution. You had this idea that sexual jealousy is going to disappear. Everyone's going to have sex with each other. You had the hippie movement. You had all of this. Yet people became more conservative afterwards, and sexual jealousy didn't go away. And to some extent, people became more conservative, and human beings go through these cycles. Now, from these materialistic philosophies, it's very difficult to explain conservatism. It's very difficult to actually explain why human beings go back to religion, go back to these types of things. And even the way that, for example, the case that we do often speak about is the Soviet Union. I don't think it's been studied enough. Again, why did people go back to what they originally believed in? Why did they discard these things? How easy was it for them to just break off the shackles of these materialistic philosophies? Although from a, if you look at it from nature nurture point of view, and the way that they try and argue that religion's all nurture, it's not nature, then these people were nurtured in atheism from birth, but they go back to something they were not nurtured in, but something that was there in the oxygen, right? And again, I think it's so important for us not to shy away that these behavioral sciences requires theology's input.
Yeah, bro. It's evident based on the research and the history that there is an element of the human being which is intrinsically religious and requires the belief in God. Right? It's apparent, bro. Like, you can't deny this anymore. We will refer to that, maybe in aspects of that, as the fitra, which is the natural disposition of the human being.
Yeah.
But there's a constant attempt to try push these things away, but it keeps coming back to bite you in the backside, right? So, I mean, you mentioned earlier about atheist civilizations, and we can wrap up on this.
A lack of
atheist civilizations. But even the ones you mentioned, like whether it's China, the Soviet Union,
they're not civilizations. They are leeches of previous
so that's what I was getting at, that they always import the moral, ethical value system into their system. They rely upon it, they leech off of it, and then they build upon that, or try to build upon that, right? But they can't. They're not successful in the long run.
They are using the architecture and the furniture of religion to lay the groundworks for an atheist to stay. But then they never get rid of that furniture. They always keep it there.
But it has to disappear because...
Like, why, for example, why even talk about love? I mean, what is love? How can you break it down into some sort of empirical test? How can you mathematically prove it? How can you... You can't do any of these things. Yet, love, hope, fear, ethics,
selfless.
Morals, all of these things. Even... How can you explain these things? Even intentionality. Right? All of these things, but they still have this thing where they just don't want to accept defeat.
Yeah. So, what's your concluding remarks, bro? What do you want people to take away from this?
Well, actually, this is interesting, Imran. Right? If you are studying sociology, if you're studying anthropology, economics, international relations, things to do with human behavioral sciences. Well, other people would say they're not sciences, but let's forget about that, because they try and say things like psychology and other sort of things are not science. But anyway, what do you think about their current assumptions and their current axioms and the predictions that they come up with, and how those are working, and how, if we were to allow a theological input, how they would look? I would love to, if somebody writes something on this.
It would be brilliant, bro. Whichever way you look at it, from a civilization perspective, from an ethical grounding perspective, from the perspective of existential meaning, it's godlessness, atheism is void of being able to provide grounds for these things. And these are fundamental things for the human condition and human civilization.
Sorry to cut you there. I just remembered something. I want you to end upon this, right? So I met this person who was an atheist, and they were giving dawah. When I met them, they became Muslim, right? And I asked them, what led you to Islam? And they said something very interesting. They said that when they read the Quran, the way that human beings are described by Allah, by God, is the way that human beings are. And there is something very powerful in that for those people with those behavioral science backgrounds.
Brilliant. Jazakallah khair, bro. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam. What do you want me to do? Just like...
No, that's enough.
Where is this awkward moment in the end?
The video. You don't end it.
Yeah, forget it.